loud, bright, and impossibly catchy. Radio stations played them constantly. MTV put their faces on every screen, and then, without warning, they were gone. These are 15 bands that lit up the decade and somehow slipped through the cracks of history. If music from the 80s still stops you in your tracks, consider subscribing to Golden Rewind so you never miss a video like this. Number 15. Pseudo Echo. Out of Melbourne, Australia, Pseudo Echo built a sound that felt like it had been assembled inside a neon warehouse at 2 in the morning. Synthesizers, sequencers, and a drummer who hit everything like he had a personal score to settle. Their cover of Lips Incorporated's Funky Town in 1987 crossed over into the American and European markets, giving them a moment most Australian acts at the time could only dream about. But their original material, particularly tracks like Don't Go and Listening, showed a band with genuine compositional instincts. They disappeared from international radio almost as quickly as they arrived. The timing was brutal, landing just as the market began shifting away from pure synth-pop toward harder rock textures. Most American listeners today remember the song without ever knowing who sang it. See that girl, she's the one I want. Number 14. When in Rome. British synth-pop duo Clive Farrell and Andrew Mann recorded The Promise in 1988, and the song became one of the most quietly devastating ballads the decade produced. Understated, slow-burning, genuinely emotional. It found a new generation of listeners when Cameron Crowe licensed it for the film Say Anything in 1989, and yet the band behind it remained almost completely invisible to the American public. The Promise climbed into the top 11 of the Billboard Hot 100. For a duo that released only a handful of singles and one album before dissolving, that is a remarkable achievement. Most people who hear the song today stop and say they know it, but cannot place it. The name, When in Rome, rings no bells. That is the definition of obscure. Number 13. Glass Tiger. Toronto, Canada, 1986. A band of 5 musicians who genuinely understood the architecture of a pop hook. Don't Forget Me When I'm Gone reached number 1 in Canada and climbed into the top 10 in the United States, which made Glass Tiger one of the more commercially successful entries on this list. And yet, within a few years, they had largely vanished from the American conversation. Their debut album, The Thin Red Line, sold over 1 million copies worldwide. Singer Alan Frew had real presence, and the band's production sat somewhere between glossy pop and something with actual weight. They had a second single, Someday, that performed nearly as well. The machinery was in place for a long career. It simply did not materialize. Number 12. Translator. San Francisco's Translator never chased a hit. That decision may have cost them everything commercially, and it remains the most interesting thing about them. Their 1982 single, Everywhere That I'm Not, was precise. Melodic new wave with a lyrical intelligence most of their contemporaries could not match. Critics noticed. Radio programmers were considerably less enthusiastic. 4 albums released between 1982 and 1985, a devoted following in the Bay Area, some college radio traction. But the mainstream market never opened for them, and by the middle of the decade they had quietly broken up. Guitarist and vocalist Steve Barton continued writing and performing for years afterward, but Translator the band belongs firmly to those who lived in the right city at the right time and paid close attention. Number 11. Dramarama. Anything, Anything was the kind of song that announced itself at a party and owned the room for the next 4 minutes. Dramarama released it in 1985 out of Los Angeles by way of New Jersey, and it had an urgency that felt completely unlike the polished synth-pop dominating the radio at the time. Guitars, swagger, a vocal from John Easdale that sounded genuinely desperate. The song became a cult favorite, but never a mainstream smash. Dramarama continued releasing albums into the 90s, picking up a modestly larger audience with each record, but the commercial breakthrough never arrived. Their catalog holds up extraordinarily well. Anything in particular sounds as alive today as it did nearly 4 decades ago. Before we continue, drop a comment and let us know where you are watching from. It is always good to hear where the Golden Rewind community is spread across the country. Number 10. The Outfield.
As you leave a place once you close the door, and you forget what I told.
British trio, South London origins. One song so enormous it dwarfed everything else they ever recorded, which is both the story of their success and the story of their commercial disappearance. Your Love reached number 6 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1986. Tony Lewis's falsetto was instantly recognizable. The guitar riff was borrowed, consciously or not, from any number of power pop forebears and somehow made to feel entirely fresh. The Outfield released 6 studio albums over roughly 2 decades. None of them approached the commercial footprint of Your Love. But the band continued working, touring, recording, and building a loyal following who sought out the deeper catalog and found a band with considerably more range than a single song suggested. Tony Lewis passed away in October of 2020, which prompted a brief but genuine outpouring of affection for a musician who had been quietly undervalued for years. Number 9. Fra Lippo Lippi. Norwegian duo Per Øystein Sorensen and Rune Christoffersen built a sound that had almost nothing in common with the bombast typically associated with 80s pop. Atmospheric, restrained, built on layered keyboards and vocals that barely raised themselves above a whisper. Shouldn't Have to Be Like That appeared on their 1985 album Songs and earned the duo international attention, particularly in Southeast Asia, where they developed a fan base that endured for decades. In the United States, they were nearly invisible. The sound was too European, too patient for American radio formats of the time. But there is something about Fra Lippo Lippi that rewards rediscovery. The restraint that made them commercially difficult is exactly what makes them interesting now.
Some people just don't see it when they fall.
Number 8. Scandal. New York City, 1982. Guitarist Zach Smith assembled a band around singer Patti Smith, whose voice could fill an arena without a microphone. Goodbye to You was the song that put Scandal on the map, a sharp anthemic breakup track that demonstrated Smith's ability to inhabit a lyric completely. It reached the top 20 and gave the band enough momentum to carry forward. 2 years later, The Warrior arrived and became a genuine top 5 hit. Patti Smith was suddenly one of the most prominent rock vocalists in America. And then the combination of a band dissolution and label complications essentially stalled the momentum at its peak. Smith went on to a solo career and remained respected in the industry, but Scandal the band became a footnote when it deserved to be a chapter. Number 7. The Alarm.
Just be afraid in this power that age, but there's one thing we all must.
Welsh post-punk acoustic guitars held aloft like weapons, and a singer in Mike Peters who delivered every lyric as though he was addressing a stadium from the back of a flatbed truck. The Alarm emerged from Rhyl in North Wales around 1981 and spent much of the decade building a following that was fiercely loyal and almost entirely invisible to mainstream American radio. They toured with U2 in the early part of the decade and developed a sound that critics frequently compared to The Clash, though The Alarm were warmer and more melodic than that comparison fully captures. The Stand, 68 Guns, and Strength remain powerful records. Peters has continued performing under the Alarm name for decades, and the band maintains one of the more dedicated cult audiences of any 80s act. Now, a quick question before we get to the final 6. Which of these bands do you remember most clearly? Drop your answer in the comments below. Number 6. Naked Eyes. Rob Fisher and Pete Byrne formed Naked Eyes in Bath, England, and delivered two of the most underrated singles of 1982 and 1983. Always Something There to Remind Me, a cover of the Burt Bacharach and Hal David standard, reached the top 8 of the Billboard Hot 100. Promises, Promises followed and performed nearly as well. For a brief window, Naked Eyes sounded like they were building towards something substantial. Rob Fisher went on to join Climby Fisher in the late 80s and found renewed success there. Pete Byrne continued as a solo artist. Naked Eyes as a creative unit produced only 2 albums before dissolving. The recordings retain a warmth and melodic sophistication that feels completely at home alongside the best pop of the era. Number 5. Til Tuesday. Amy Mann formed Til Tuesday in Boston in the early 80s, and the band's debut single Voices Carry became a top 10 hit in 1985. The song's music video, set in Carnegie Hall with Mann's character silenced and humiliated by her boyfriend, was direct and emotional in a way that much of 80s video production was not. It felt like it meant something. Mann is now recognized as one of the more important singer-songwriters of her generation, with a solo catalog that has earned consistent critical admiration. But Til Tuesday, the band tends to get reduced to a single song, which understates the quality of 3 albums made between 1985 and 1988. Welcome Home, in particular, is a record worth sitting with. Number 4. Animotion. Obsession arrived in late 1984 and became one of those songs that seemed to come from everywhere at once, inescapable on radio and MTV through the first half of 1985. It reached number 6 on the Billboard Hot 100. Bill Wadhams and Astrid Plain traded vocals over a synthesizer arrangement that felt simultaneously cold and completely irresistible. Animotion released a second album and charted again with Room to Move, but the commercial peak had passed. The band went through several lineup changes and attempted a number of returns to the market without recapturing the momentum of that first hit. Obsession still surfaces regularly in films and television, which has kept it circulating while the band's name remains largely unknown to the people who love the song. Number 3. Quarterflash. Portland, Oregon produced Quarterflash, and Quarterflash produced one of the most distinctive sounds of 1981. Rindy Ross played saxophone and sang lead, which was an unusual combination that gave the band an immediately identifiable sonic identity. Harden My Heart reached the top 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 and announced a band with genuine commercial instincts and a sound no one else was making. Find Another Fool followed and performed well. Quarterflash released 2 studio albums and spent the early part of the decade building a solid audience. Then the radio shifted, the saxophone-driven sound fell out of fashion with considerable speed, and the band found themselves without a commercial home. Rindy and Marv Ross remained active as musicians for years afterward. Harden My Heart remains one of the decade's truly underappreciated singles. Number 2. Book of Love. New York synth-pop quartet, 1985 debut album. Boy and I Touch Roses were not hit singles in the traditional sense. They were cult objects, passed between people who had found something slightly stranger and more interesting than the mainstream was offering. Book of Love occupied a specific artistic space that sat somewhere between dance music and art pop, and they occupied it with an unusual combination of commitment and humor. 4 albums over roughly a decade, and a fan base that never grew enormous but also never entirely disappeared. Their influence on the electronic pop acts that emerged in the 90s and 2000s was acknowledged quietly by musicians who had clearly been listening. Book of Love is one of those bands where discovery feels like finding something that was waiting for you specifically. Number 1. The Romantics. Detroit. 4 musicians who had been playing together since the mid-70s and understood, perhaps better than any band on this list, the relationship between a great melody and an unstoppable groove. Talking in Your Sleep arrived in 1983 and spent months on radio stations across America, reaching the top 5 nationally and becoming one of the decade's most immediate, recognizable hooks. Romantics had been working for years before that moment arrived, releasing music that critics respected and building a live reputation in the Midwest that was genuinely formidable. What I Like About You from 1980 is still heard regularly in sports arenas and film soundtracks. They were a real band with real chops, and talking in your sleep was not luck, it was craft. There is something quietly satisfying about remembering that.
Whispering in my ear, tell me everything I wanna hear, it's true.